Today on Work in Progress, are you robot ready? Hello, everybody. I'm Ramona Schindelheim, Senior Business Correspondent for WorkingNation. There's a lot of talk about the future of work, how rapid advances in technology are changing the very nature of the jobs we do. We're seeing the workforce shifting toward knowledge-based, highly skilled jobs and away from industrial jobs. Some jobs are going away, many others are being created. So instead of just talking about the future of work, we at WorkingNation believe it is important to talk about the future of the worker. Who is helping them get ready for these changing jobs and these new jobs, and how are they doing it? Today on Work in Progress, we're focusing on the role higher education plays in that important mission. My guest is Michelle Weise, the Chief Innovation Officer of the Strada Institute for the Future of Work and the Senior Vice President of Workforce Strategies at Strada Education Network. Strada is a national nonprofit dedicated to improving lives by catalyzing more direct and promising pathways between education and employment. Michelle, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're very excited to talk to you today because Strada has just released, along with Emsi, a labor market analytics firm, a new report called Robot Ready. And since we're always talking about how humans can work with machinery and technology of the future, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you see robot-ready workers in the future?
Yeah, so right now, as you've probably noticed in the media, these sort of future of work conversations are really trending. And it's partly because we're all kind of starting to feel the velocity of technological change. There's so many advancements in machine learning and automation. And so as a result, you have all these forecasts out there about potential massive job obsolescence or the way in which robots are going to take over. And what's missing from that is these kind of doomsday forecasts tend to sort of overlook the idea that actually we're already in that robo-human future. We're already engaging with and complementing the work of robots and chatbots, and it's just there in our lives. We kind of engage seamlessly with all the automation, and we kind of take it for granted. And so the question then becomes, as we continue to kind of experience these exponential changes, how do we better prepare for that future of work? And so that's what this report gets at, is that in a lot of the literature, you're seeing this notion of human skills that are like ways in which we can outcompete robots, right? Because there are certain things that we'll never be able to do better than a computer. And so, how do we then think about our uniquely human skills that we can leverage in order to complement and coordinate better with the robots in the future? And so that's why we talk about these human skills.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot at Working Nation, that some of the jobs that we're doing now can be automated, but not all of them. So that fear of the future and fear of the robots taking over is a little exaggerated, I guess, to say. And we can actually use them to do some of the more mundane jobs that we do. And what we need as human beings to keep moving forward are using our cognitive thinking, our strategic thinking. And so your report really, and you at Strada are saying that's what we need to be concentrating on.
Exactly. There's so many human skills out there, and there are a lot of names for these kinds of skills. You know, if you think about flexibility, ethics, resilience, systems thinking, communication, critical thinking, these are things that people often call core skills, power skills, soft skills, non-cognitive skills, 21st century skills. But we like to call them human skills because it helps us define what robots or computers may not be able to do. What are our uniquely human skills that will be able to leverage in the future?
I think it's very important, given one of the statements in your report, and it's a pretty provocative prediction from futurists and experts on aging, that the first people to live to be 150 years old have already been born. So in that context, we need to be able to figure out how to prepare people for careers that are going to last a lot longer than they last now.
Yeah, we are just going to experience more career transitions than we've ever dreamed of, right? If we think about people living to possibly 150 years old, that means that we'll be working potentially for 80 or 100 years. I mean, it's just kind of unfathomable, right? And so, even if we develop some strong human skills on the front end of that 100-year work life, what are the kinds of technical skills or other skills that we're going to have to develop in order to remain relevant in the workforce, and how are we going to actually retool and upskill ourselves for that much, much longer lifespan?
So the report focuses a lot on focuses on post-secondary education, and you were kind of blunt when you were saying in the report that educators are out of step already with the changing needs of the economy. And as it turns out, the number of liberal arts graduates who are moving into the tech jobs is actually outpacing those that are from STEM degrees. So, how do you get the colleges, universities in step with what is needed right now?
So, one of the things we wanted to do in this report was focus specifically on liberal arts majors. And that's because we're in a unique period of time where liberal arts majors are actually, the enrollment numbers are plummeting. They're very much on the decline. And we see the vast majority of learners moving into very career specific training and majors. And if we think about the need and the growing need for these human skills for the future of work, what are we going to do when one of the major sources of that cultivation of skills, not that you can't get it anywhere else either, but this is one of the major ways in which we cultivate those uniquely human skills through liberal arts programs? What do we do if they're on the decline? And so, what we try to do in this report is show how liberal arts graduates actually deploy these human skills in the workforce. And because we have this incredible affiliate, Emsi, which does a lot of work with labor market analytics, we can actually follow graduates over their first, second, and third jobs. And we can see the ways in which they are increasing their social mobility and moving into more high skills careers and earning better wages, and also translating those human skills into the language of the workforce. One of the big just sort of chasms that we have is the disconnect between education and employment. Educators and employers seem to value the same outcomes, but they speak entirely different languages. So the skills that we talk about don't translate across this disconnect. And so it's really helpful for us to look at labor market data and say, when we talk about communication, or when we talk about this very broad term like critical thinking, we can actually see how it manifests into discrete skills and, and promising pathways for liberal arts graduates. And so if we then backwards map, we can be able to say to post secondary institutions, listen, these skills actually manifest in really concrete ways in the labor market, and they actually kind of look almost like very technical skill sets. We just have to have a better translation process that gets us from one side to the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the report that liberal arts graduates are entering the tech workforce actually faster or at a greater pace than people who are studying these STEM careers. So that's kind of interesting. So it seems to reinforce the idea that these soft skills are helping people understand the jobs of today.
Yeah, so what emerges from the data is that really all jobs are becoming so much more hybrid in terms of demanding a high level of human skills and technical skill sets. So even if you go into journalism, for instance, you're going to have to be pretty well, pretty savvy in things like web design and web development and SEO and things like that, where, most folks may be studying that in a college or university may not be developing those technical skill sets along with just sort of general writing skills. And so, what we try to do with this data is translate that broad skill into the language of the workforce. And so, what we see is like when liberal arts grads go into something like marketing, something like communication or problem solving manifests as these kinds of very granular skills around lead generation or cooperation, strategic planning, crisis communications, or customer retention. But unfortunately, if you think about that disconnect, most of our educators don't necessarily know the outcomes of their liberal arts grads and where they do land and what kinds of skills they're actually deploying in the workforce. So to be able to bring that language kind of back and forth may be what we need, and it's what we call the Rosetta Stone for skills for the future. It might be that thing that makes that translation process clearer.
Why do you think there is that disconnect?
I think it's we use different coding systems, so we use just different taxonomies. Higher education institutions adhere to something called a SIP code, whereas our Bureau of Labor Statistics uses SOC codes. There's these two languages that don't actually connect. And at the same time, again, to kind of go back to that original debate around whether we should be preparing students for work or just learning how to learn for a lifetime, what this data shows us is that these liberal arts grads are learning how to learn for a lifetime, and they're using those very broad human skills to transfer from domain to domain, but they're often kind of doing it stumbling in the dark by themselves, and they need better advising and better career advising, and also opportunities to acquire some of those skills so that they can be successful more quickly as soon as they graduate.
So do you know of any school? I know since you're at Strada, look at education um, institutes and that. Do you know of any school or university system that might be doing this correctly right now?
Yeah, so one of the real opportunities here that we kind of lay out towards the end of the report is that if we really want to build these kind of nimble thinkers of the future who can kind of adapt in any situation and be flexible and exhibit judgment in highly ambiguous circumstances. These are all the things that employers say they want, those kind of systems level thinking, those critical thinkers, communicators, collaborators. If we really want those kinds of incredibly nimble folks in the field who are leveraging those uniquely human skills, we need to be revamping our curriculum in new ways that help people understand how to synthesize and how to make connections across disciplines and across domains. If you think just currently about how we scaffold learning within higher education institutions, we use these kind of artificial departmental structures. And so people don't know how to transfer knowledge from one discipline to another. And so we see now different universities playing around with this notion of problem based learning, where they give students a problem to solve, and that's how they engage the student, and then kind of inter, basically take those students, and with just in time learning, you understand the technical skills in calculus that you might need to use and apply in this particular problem. And you see a lot of this development actually happening more right now on the engineering side. You see the National Academies of Engineering came out with this idea of a Grand Challenges Scholars Program, which is really kind of to get more people excited about solving real world problems, to get just almost weed them into engineering instead of weed them out. They're trying to get more women, more minorities into these programs by solving problems instead of just being shunted right into a calculus class. But there's really no reason why that has to apply only to engineering students. We need to kind of see this sort of more full embrace of problem-based learning across the board if we really want to enhance those human skills.
To go back to that idea of the Rosetta Stone, like a modern day Rosetta Stone that you talk about in the report, you mentioned leading up to that there's a gap between what's happening in education and what the workforce wants right now. So that's created a workforce learning industry of like $2.9 billion and hundreds of new companies popping up. What could educators maybe learn from that?
Yeah, so I mean, if educators don't step up to the plate, right, there's a whole slew of innovators and entrepreneurs out there trying to solve this problem too, and trying to connect students more directly to employment or opportunity pathways, right? And you kind of have seen this bubbling on the margins with the emergence of things like boot camps, right? These kinds of online, or it's not, sorry, they're mostly actually immersive, but these kinds of web development boot camps, even sales boot camps or data analytics boot camps, and they're really trying to make those more direct connections again to good jobs, and it's helping helping folks acquire really important technical skill sets that are in demand. So if educators don't step up to the plate, right, there are a whole lot of organizations that they are going to start to compete with that they maybe have never heard of before, and they won't necessarily be their peer institutions as that regional college or university that they tend to compare themselves to. So I think this this paper really kind of tries to make a case for the importance of these kinds of human liberal arts competencies, but also is very clear that the status quo cannot persist. We can't just sort of stick with what we've got and continue to let students just kind of stumble their way through and figure out how they translate their skills into the workforce. We have to be much more deliberate about how we help students through this process. And there's a great opportunity ahead for a lot of institutions to really embrace this new work and build those learners of the future who really can pivot from job to job and leverage those skills from domain to domain.
And I know the report, in conclusion, pretty much calls on policymakers, employers, educators, and learners to work together to abandon the status quo. And it sounds like the people who are looking for work and the employers who are looking for good workers, plus the educators, all need to work together to come up with what the best solution is.
Yeah, I think one of the most disheartening things in sort of the education to employment space is to just see so many people working in silos and not collaborating with one another and just, building one proprietary solution after the other or one set of competencies that doesn't align with anyone else's competencies. And so we run the risk of huge inefficiency in the system. You kind of referenced that $2.9 billion marketplace that has emerged, but that's also really reflective of that huge inefficiency and that disconnect in the system. It would just be incredible if we could incentivize from a policy perspective or from a funder's perspective, or bring all these groups together to actually build that common taxonomy to start collaborating on that Rosetta Stone so that we have more standardized job postings and that employers are really articulating exactly what it is that they are asking for. There's just huge inefficiency of the system, and I can't wait to see sort of more collaboration in the field.
So, what would your next step be? What would you suggest to the universities very specifically?
I think the easiest first step is to just sort of really think about why we currently scaffold learning the way that we do. How important is it for us to stick to what we've got in terms of departmental structures, for instance? There are already universities playing around with de-siloing efforts and tearing down those disciplinary walls. Olin College comes to mind in Massachusetts, where they no longer have departments and it's more of this transdisciplinary approach to teaching. I think there's a real opportunity for universities just to kind of look at what they're doing and understand in order for my college or university to distinguish itself from another, why does my program have to look exactly the way that their program does? Is there an opportunity to maybe think more critically about how we embed apprenticeship opportunities or co-op opportunities or problem-based opportunities? There's Michael Crow has this really interesting quote where I'll have to find the exact way that he words it, but he says, "Isn't it a problem that all universities kind of look the same? Right? Why do all our programs actually look alike? We should really be trying to distinguish ourselves from one another." And I think that's a real opportunity there, kind of low hanging fruit for universities to look at models like the Grand Challenges Scholars Program and think about how we create more local challenges or things that will include humanities majors, et cetera.
I think that idea, though, that, to pick up on the idea of the localizing some of the solutions or some of the education programs is a very interesting idea, because we talk about solutions to the workforce issues are local because the businesses are local and they mean a lot to communities and the people who are in those communities.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes that can be more tangible and relevant to a learner's experience. Sometimes those kinds of really broad-based challenges like how do you capture solar energy more efficiently don't necessarily, speak to the hearts of some of these, young learners or adult learners. Whereas, helping a local community-based organization solve a huge pain point could really engage that learner in a new way. And you see some really interesting curriculum uh, coming out of colleges who are thinking about problem-based learning, where they're getting students to learn design thinking in their first year, where they're put on campus. I know at Dartmouth they do this with all of their engineering majors. As an example, they get them out across the campus and have them solve problems for the career services department or for the library. And again, that's not something that engineering students have to do. It's all of us who have to kind of learn these capabilities. The other piece I would just add is, there's a real opportunity to kind of think about, if we think about that 100-year work life again, how are we going to better assess where we are in terms of the skills, those human skills that we have and the technical skills that we have, and how do we transition into new work of the future? One of the things that just begs is we need better assessments in the space. We need better ways for employers and learners to connect so that employers understand all the hidden knowledge and assets that that person may have that they might not have considered to be able to do that job. What are the attribute gaps to take someone from truck driving into an IT job? There's a real open opportunity for us to think about this Rosetta Stone and connect educators and employers and all these different stakeholders together to basically start building that what we call the learning ecosystem of the future. We just need more elements there to facilitate more seamless movements in and out of learning and work.
It's such a great report, Robot Ready, and we're going to have it posted on our website, so there will be a link so everyone listening can actually go in and look at it. And there's so much more to unpack on it that we can't just cover in 20 minutes. So I thank you, Michelle, very much for being a part of our work in progress, and I invite everybody to click on the link.
Thanks so much.